Hello, and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin from the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how you doing this week?
Doing great. How about you, Eric?
Doing fantastic. I'm looking forward to this because as we're reaching out to our listeners, this is our 100th Success Showcase podcast. So it's a bit of a milestone.
Oh, wow. I'm going to have to start using an electronic calculator to get that high. Not.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like we've been doing it that long, but we've got a 100 under our belt as of today. And since it is our 100th, we thought we'd talk about the lessons we've learned over those last 100 episodes. We've had a lot of different topics, talked about a lot of great books and resources. So we're going to talk about, what it is we've learned over those 100 episodes.
Yeah, you and I mean, we both come from similar, shall we say, philosophies about things and whatever. And the second one was fun because it was networking tricks and treats. It must have been around October sometime, which is fun. We always talk about that. But the third one is kind of what gets us where we're going, and it's really behind everything that's successful. It was called the power of gratitude. And the bottom line is, no matter what we're talking about, what topics and so on and so forth, if you approach life with gratitude for the great things that are going on and the opportunities that you have, uh, it's really, really important to do that. And if we're calling this the success showcase, that is one of the keys to it, is developing that positive mindset in the first place. But the maintenance mechanism for everything is gratitude, just feeling it and acting upon it when you feel it.
Yeah, and that's something we've talked about a lot. Not just gratitude, but the positive mindset in general. As we've done research and in both of our own work, we've seen the power of a positive mindset and what it really means. And of course, we've been very careful to specify that it's not simply a blind optimistic attitude. It's really about looking at things and saying, okay, this is not the end of the world. How do we deal with this? And moving forward from it. So a positive mindset really does look at what's really going on, but it looks at it as an opportunity. And as you said, gratitude is a great way to keep fueling that positive mindset because you're looking at things that have happened and you're being grateful for them because even the bad things help shape who you are today. And of course, if you weren't who you are today, you wouldn't be getting the opportunities that you're getting.
No, and we talk a lot about personal development, growth, and all this other kind of thing, and really getting down to the crux of it. We've talked so many times that it's so important to take a lot of time periodically with that person in the mirror, and that's you. And it's coming up with your own personal strategic plan, personal growth plan about every aspect of your life. And one of the ways to do that, really the foundation for doing that, is sitting down and reflecting on what's been working for you so far, the things that you like to do, the things that you're good at, all of the positive experiences in your life, and the things that you're not good at also, so that you can kind of sub that out to other things going on. And then actually gathering that information, kind of figuring out what your purpose in this world is, because it's going to be crystal clear once you start analyzing what's going on. What do you stand for? What makes you feel good? And that kind of thing. So your personal development plan, personal strategic plan, it's just so important to do that. And a lot of what we talk about is that a lot of people think it's taboo for you to work on yourself and to pat yourself on the back. Whereas we've said many times, it's impossible to be your best self for everybody else out there unless you're really at peace and happy with the person in the mirror. So it all starts with personal development work. And that's going to help you develop gratitude, because once you look at all these things that go into that as the foundation in the first place, you're going to say, wow, I really do have a lot to be grateful for. So let's put this thing together and work on it.
Absolutely. One of the things we've seen over and over again is that the most successful people never stop trying to improve themselves. I mean, if you just read, business publications, you'll see a constant stream of articles about books that successful people recommend. And I mean, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, they've all talked about the need to keep learning and to keep improving. And it really is a sign that, so many people that are unsuccessful are the ones that say, "Oh, well, I don't have time to build work on myself, or I don't need to work on myself because that's not the important thing." Where the successful people really do make time for that. There was a recent article, I think it was in Inc. magazine, talking to Jack Dorsey, who is the CEO of both Twitter and Square. And he's CEO of two major public corporations. And yet he makes the time every day to meditate twice because he feels that that part of self-improvement is so important that even with everything he's got going on, he needs to make time for it at least twice a day.
Yeah, and meditation really is just taking a moment off from your reactions before you respond to things. And if you can concentrate on doing that for 20 minutes a day, that's fantastic. But we talk a whole lot about the formula event plus response equals outcome. And so often people's responses are their initial reactions. They just blame outcomes on events without even thinking about it. And so if you can build a meditation practice, which is nothing more than just being mindless without observing, really without making any decisions or judging and that kind of thing, it's so important to do that. So it's something that I'm working on, and a whole lot of other people do. And there's no right way to do it, and everybody's going to drift and so on and so forth. But to put that in practice and to knock your 60,000 thoughts a day down to maybe 50 or 40,000 because you're taking a little bit of time out is a great, great thing to do.
Right. And that's actually the hardest part of meditation is getting your brain to be quiet. And it does take a lot of practice. But when you're meditating, you know, you quiet your brain down, you relax your brain, you relax your muscles, and you're really focusing on your own well-being. And it's sort of a recharge. And again, over the last 100 episodes, one of the things we've learned is how many people have found success and how many of them actually come out and say this is what was so important was the idea of being able to reflect, because before that they were running in all different directions and they were more responsive than proactive.
Yeah, they
And
were just kind of running through life, just letting life happen to them. And we've talked a lot about the law of attraction, and one of the things that meditation can do is help you concentrate on the power of positive thinking. And we've talked about a couple of wonderful books that have talked about this, both old and new. Actually, they're both kind of older because we talked about The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace Waddles, and we talked about Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, and then more recently we have The Secret by Rhonda Byrne. But it all just goes back to what the law is, and the bottom line is whatever you're thinking about and exposing yourself to, you are likely to become. So if you can train yourself to hang around with positivity and to enforce that, you're going to have a whole lot more positive life. And obviously, just taking a deep breath and meditating on the positive is really, really important. Because oftentimes, when you are meditating, you're thinking of a mantra or something like that positive before you start doing it. And you go back to that when you're kind of swaying.
yeah, and we talked about these books you mentioned, and two of them are actually from the early 20th century. And we talked about The Science of Getting Rich, we talked about Think and Grow Rich. We've also, from that same time period, talked about the seven habits of effective people. And I think those three books especially show that the process of building your success really hasn't changed. I mean, we have all this technology now to help us out. There's all sorts of different things we have to deal with. But when you get right down to the basics, it's the same now as it was in the early 20th century. So, 100 years later, we still need to know those same basics. And people tend to forget about that. They'll look at, whatever the most recent glittery object is, rather than focusing on those age old basics that have helped people succeed over and over and over again. And in The Science of Getting Rich, Waddles talks about the fact that the whole idea is that if you do the same things, you get the same result. So if you do the things that haven't been working for you, they're not going to work again. But when you follow that certain way and do what has been proven to create success, you will succeed.
Yeah, you're absolutely forming the results in your life. And I mean, these are age old. I mean, these go back centuries and centuries. And if you look at maybe even old Bible passages and this and that and before, it's all the same thing. And I mean, you talked about getting back to the basics, and that's the key, especially these days where we're saturated with the media and everything else. Everything is overcomplicated. You got 25 ways to do one little thing. Whereas you just get back to the basics that, if I'm thinking positive things and I'm being positive towards other people, it's going to make other people happy and it's going to make me happy too. Plain and simple. These are all always the way it has been, and they are again in Dr. Ivan Misner BNI's terms, BFOs. They are all blinding flashes of the obvious. So the more that we can get back to the basics, the better off we're all going to be. And that's a nice way to ground yourself, especially when you're doing a mindfulness practice. You just have one simple thing to say to yourself that grounds you.
Absolutely. And, you just said about how you relate to other people, and you mentioned BNI, which is about networking. And that's something else that people really need to remember, and that we've talked a number of times about over the past 100 episodes, is that to really succeed, you're not doing this alone. You need relationships. You need to build your networks. You need to build your resources. No one person can do everything all by themselves. And
No,
we've talked a number of times about the importance of having relationships, the importance of having networks, and about being connected to people who can do what you can't.
yeah, Wallace Waddles, he wrote the book about the original book about the law of attraction. And then just to review, Napoleon's Hill's Think and Grow Rich was the result of him meeting with Andrew Carnegie, who was the richest man in the world back then, very, very successful. And the way that this got going is Napoleon Hill was a young aspiring author, and he met with Andrew Carnegie. And Andrew Carnegie said, there's a reason why myself and Rockefeller and all these other Fords, Henry Ford, are successful. And it's a lot more than just money and this and that, whatever. I am going to set it up for you to meet all of these people, and you're going to write a book, which I'm not going to pay you for, but I am going to set all these interviews up for you so that you can meet all these people to find out what the secrets are. And this is where Think and Grow Rich came from. And one of the keys is the relationships that they have. They all have their big networks. This is the book that spawned the mastermind principle, where two or more minds get together, a third more powerful mastermind is created to help solve things. So, I mean, again, getting back to the basics, it's in so many books and things that we've talked about in different ways, but it really gets back to the same thing. And relationships are really, really one of the main keys to success and happiness. Because again, you can't do it yourself. And if you don't have other people in the world with you, I don't care how successful you are monetarily or whatever, you are going to be miserable.
That's absolutely true. It really is so important to have these relationships because, again, if you're fighting the uphill battle all by yourself, one, it's very lonely, but two, you're taking on the world when you don't really have to.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, we talked about the seven habits of highly successful people, which is about personal and then professional growth with people, beginning with the end in mind, things like that, thinking win-win, synergizing, and that kind of thing. Um, one of the best books that we've talked about a couple of times, where if this whole world practiced the principles in this book, there would be a whole lot less problems in the world. In fact, I think they would all go away, is my favorite, called How to Win Friends and Influence People. Because so often we talk about what's wrong and so on and so forth, and immediately we're going to be Mr. and Mrs. Fix It and fix this person and fix that problem and so on and so forth, just by trying to make them quote unquote change. And the bottom line is people only change when it's their idea, when they're ready to do it. So, what How to Win Friends and Influence People is all about, which is a great book by Dale Carnegie that I recommend everybody get and just print out all the principles in that. It's only a one pager. This tells you exactly how you can respond to the different circumstances in your life. We talked about reacting versus responding. If you can put that gap in there and take your reaction and look at the responses that are in this book, it's a miracle worker for you, and it's really very easy to do.
Absolutely. And again, that's another one of those books that has been around for a century or so, and those basics haven't changed. Now, of course, not everything is exactly the same. And, we've talked about a number of books over the course of the podcast. And I think two of the best that we've brought in that are relatively new compared to these others, but really talk about the same principles in new ways, were The Lean Startup and Rich Dad Poor Dad. And both of those, while they talked about processes and how to do things, they were about also about shifting your mindset to see how these things are done. The Lean Startup really talked about how your failures aren't failures unless you fail to learn from them, and how everything should be an experiment. And the more you learn, the more successful you'll be. Whereas Rich Dad Poor Dad talked about the difference in mindset of how successful people view money. And I mean, I've heard a lot of people talking recently, um, given that we are recording this on April 15th, they've been talking about their taxes and complaining about the taxes. And I keep saying, wow, you guys need to read Rich Dad Poor Dad because you're looking at this wrong. And that's why you're paying so much in taxes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, the concept there is to pay yourself first. Make sure you're looking out for that first. But he talks about the different ways to do that and how dependent you are. And if you can just start a business through which you are funneling all these expenses and so on, because it's your business too, you can save a whole lot of money just by putting an LLC around yourself and other things that way. Because if you're taking trips and whatever, and you're incorporating business into that, um, these things that normally you're going to pay with after tax income become deductions for you, and that's one of the ways to do it. So it's
Right. And the same thing applies to a small business corporation as a C Corp. Um, the big difference between that and an LLC, which I don't think they talked about in Rich Dad Poor Dad so much, but they do in some of the Rich Dad follow ups called the Rich Dad Advisors. LLC is a pass through, so you're doing your taxes on your personal taxes. C Corp, you're doing a separate tax for the corporation, but now things have changed a bit so that you're paying a lot less as a C Corp than you do as an LLC. So that's something else to look at. You know, following through those basics, but looking at current events and adapting them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's a whole lot of great things out there. The bottom line is we talk about personal professional development all the time. You should always have a book that you're reading every day or be listening to something on audible.com or in your car, because the more that you continue to feed your mind, the better off you're going to be. The bottom line is your mind's going to stay stagnant if you just sit there and don't do anything on a daily basis. And then you're going to wonder tomorrow why things are still the same. And it's because you're not doing any personal development work. And it really is fun. I mean, actually, doing this podcast every week forces a little bit of personal development for both you and me, even though we're into it anyway. But focusing on a subject together every week is fantastic. And I've learned a whole lot just by my prep work on topics that I thought that I knew a lot about until I started using the almighty Google to find out even more.
Sure, because when we prepare for one of these podcasts, we're researching the topics we're talking about. When we do the book club, we're rereading, if not, if we've read it before. And a number of the books, these were the first time I had read them. So it really, we are working on our own personal development while we're helping our listeners work on theirs.
Yeah, and also we've had a lot of great speakers on with us too to help us out with topics that neither you or I are experts on. So hopefully, I'm sure that's something that we're working on doing more in the future.
Yes, we are working on having more subject matter experts coming on to talk about what they do. And that's also something we've talked about on the air, is that you're not going to be an expert at everything, so you should be able to outsource things. And I know I've given the example of accounting and bookkeeping. Most small business owners try to do it themselves, but since they're not an expert, they're actually spending more time and money doing it themselves than they would if they hired somebody.
Yes, and payroll services and HR fall into those same categories. There's a lot of companies out there who specialize in these things that not many people like to do, and they know how to do them absolutely correctly. Compliance is a big thing, especially on the HR side of things. And a really smart business decision is to just fix that cost, take those headaches off of your shoulders, and get those things done professionally on the outside because you can't be a master of everything. And we've often talked about your own time management. And the more time that you put into your own business development and operations, as opposed to doing these little things that other people should be doing, what's that going to do for your top line? What's that going to do for your efficiency? So, I mean, it is all related, and it's important to plan. We talk about strategic planning, and that's a huge part of it.
Right, and we've talked about these things not just for business, especially time management, strategic planning. We've talked about the fact that, yes, these are business techniques, but they also work in your day to day life to make your everyday life easier. Whether you're scheduling things for work or scheduling things for the family, using the same type time management proposals and software or techniques, whatever it is that you use that makes you feel in control, using it for both personal and professional helps you out so much. And, we've talked about the fact that it's so important to get all of this out of your head and onto a piece of paper or into a spreadsheet or into a calendar, because that way you're not obsessing over it over and over again until it's done.
Yeah, and no matter what topic we're talking about, you mentioned personal, professional, work, and so on and so forth. All it is just writing things down, prioritizing them, and knocking them off one by one. And the more you do that, the better off you're going to be. And obviously, tracking results is really, really important too, which is something that you've done with your organizer. It's so important to have that. And once you do write things down, think about the last time you wrote a few things down when you hadn't for a while. How do you feel? You feel less stressed out? You feel a little bit better going into tomorrow? You absolutely do. So a minute today is going to save you 10 minutes or half an hour tomorrow just by writing it down.
And I mean, writing it down is so important. There's an old Chinese proverb: the faintest ink is better than the best memory. And it really is true, because I've actually done this where I write blogs for our corporate website, and a concept for a blog has come up. I've quickly written it down on a pad, and then, walked away, whatever, and then I'm trying to remember what that topic was. I can't remember what it was, but I know all I have to do is go back to the pad because I wrote it down.
Yep. And it's a good feeling that you did that, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
So, another thing that we talked about relationships and how to develop them and so on and so forth. And, a lot of what we talk about is networking and business and that kind of thing. And so we've had a couple of books that really talk about how you handle yourself in the workplace and how you handle yourself with clients and so on and so forth. And the two that really come to mind that are two of my favorites of all time are The Go Giver and then also The Energy Bus. Now, The Go Giver talks about just helping other people out unconditionally. without expecting anything in return, and great things are going to happen to you. And it's a story of a gentleman who's at work, who's trying to make his quarterly quota, and he's not quite going to make it. And then the bomb drops out of something. And what he ends up doing is calling this coach who really 180s the way that you look at things. And instead of I got to go get, it's by giving, the people are attracted to you and wonderful things happen. So that book is highly recommended. And the Energy Bus is all about creating your vision and working with that through people, inviting them to work along with you. It's a very, very fun story about how somebody saved his job in a department and did a great launch at work. So those are two great books: The Go Giver by Mann, and then The Energy Bus. Actually, the name will come to me before the end of this book. So
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about so many really great books. I mean, in addition to the ones we've already mentioned, there was The Greatest Salesman in the World, which was a fantastic story about how to do sales. But more importantly, it was about also, like The Go Giver, it's about in order to get sales, you have to give rather than just pushing and pushing to get.
yeah, that is one of the most popular books, well-read books ever, and that's by Og Mandino.
Yep.
And that book is really, really old. It comes, I think, from like the last 1940s and the 1950s. And he's a man that figured it out for himself too, because he was on the edge of whatever before he started writing these things. And the book itself is just amazing.
Yeah, we've done so much research and read so many books to do this podcast. I think, we've probably gained more than our listeners did just being able to learn all this. But,
Absolutely.
when it comes down to it, one of the things we've seen is that there is that constant thread. Everything builds upon what you did last, and it all requires the basics. No matter how much technology you've got or how successful you get, forgetting those basics tends to make you fail. And the more you stick to those basics and the more you remember them, and it's about building those relationships and nurturing those relationships. Relationships will fall by the wayside if you don't work at them, which is another trend that over the different topics we've seen is it all requires constant care, constant nurturing to make all of these things continue to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, if you can do it from a positive foundation, that's the key to making the whole thing work.
All right, so we're coming up to the end of our 100th episode. So, over the course of the time, what do you think is the big takeaway that our listeners should have?
In 100 words or less. I'm just thinking it's really just so important to work on that person in the mirror from a positive mindset standpoint, and then put together your plan and just go out and share yourself with others. Everybody is just a wonderful person, and we all have our own talents and so on and so forth. So instead of looking in the mirror and thinking about the things that you don't have that somebody else may have, you got things that other people don't have too. So just go out there, work on yourself, give unconditionally, and enjoy. That's really most important. It's just been really, really wonderful to be able to share things with you and share things with our audience for the last 100 episodes.
Yeah, I think the for me the big takeaway is that, I mean, to use a phrase, the more you learn, the more you earn. Keep working on yourself, keep learning new things, and keep nurturing those relationships. Don't try to do everything yourself. Reach out to people and do things together. Look at people as potential partners, not potential competitors or potential customers. This way, when you're doing for them, they're doing for you, and everybody wins. And that's, I think, a big thing is that success is not a zero sum game. You can build yourself up while building up other people as well. So I think that's my big takeaway from the last 100 episodes. So you've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch us every week at xvadio.com/podcasts. You can also find us on the Apple Podcasts app, the iTunes Store, Spotify, the iHeartRadio app, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. See you then.